I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure some of you have been to funerals, but there are like many different types of funerals. There are some that are very somber. There are some that are maybe happy. Some that are just like they knew that this day was coming and they were prepared and they died peacefully. Some may be tragic. Some may be painful. I think for myself, there was one funeral that I will never forget, and it happened when I was in college. And there was a person there who graduated from our college ministry, from our church, and he went on to seminary. He became a youth pastor. And that winter, we had a retreat, and he came to visit, and he was one of the small group leaders. He was actually my leader. And I, got to spend some time with him, got to know him. He prayed for me, and I was thankful for just his wisdom, his leadership, and just his care in my life. And then he went back to studying and to ministering out in the East Coast. And I got a call one day. I still remember I was in my room, and a classmate called and told me, "Hey, did you hear the news?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "This dear brother had just passed away." And I remember I was in such shock, and I almost dropped the phone. I said, "What happened? I just saw him just a few weeks ago." And they said he was on his way to one of his youth students who was having a lacrosse game. And as he was driving to the event, he was behind this truck. And this truck was filled with pipes. And one of the pipes got loose and came out and struck him directly into his car. And he died instantly. And even to this day, whenever I see a car with pipes, I get nervous. And I think about the friend who passed away. And it was such a tragic event. And it was one of the times where I saw the entire funeral home was packed with people. It was standing room only. And everyone was there weeping, crying. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is unreal. But I was so thankful for his life that was dedicated to Jesus and that we knew where he was going. And today we're going to be looking at the very first funeral ever recorded in the Bible. And it's dealing with the death of Sarah, the beloved wife of Abraham. And so we're going to look at this passage here, chapter 23, and how this can apply to us. And the first thing that I want us to be aware of is learn to mourn. Okay? Learn to mourn. And this was a bitter day, as would be expected of anyone who loses their spouse, whose loved one had just passed away, and you had to bury them, someone that was very close and dear to you. And even though usually it's the husband that passes away first, no one knows what the future holds. But, it's my prayer that I will be able to be there for my wife for as long as possible to protect and care for her so that she doesn't have to deal with that. So I'm praying that Jesus will return before any of us have to die so that we can go to heaven together. But we see here this was a tough time for Abraham. And he's walking through the valley of darkness, the valley of death. But as he's walking there's a light that comes in for the people, for the men and women of faith that knows that there is hope. And as a tribute to Sarah, I find it interesting that she is the only woman in the Bible whose age is listed at her death. If you notice, it starts on verse 1, says that Sarah lived 127 years. Now, I know that most women don't like to reveal their age, and so this was probably a big deal, seeing that for everyone to see and to know how long she lived. And another interesting fact is that Sarah is the only person in the Bible, only woman who got her name changed by God. So she's the only one that had that privilege of being given a new name. And she's also found in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11:11. It says, "By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. So we see here that she was a woman that trusted God and knew that whatever God said, he would do it. And it came to fruition that she gave birth to a son, even though she was well past the age of childbearing. And, out of all the women in the Bible, Sarah is mentioned the most, more than the mother of Jesus, more than Mary, more than anyone else. Sarah stands above the rest. So she was a character, and she had enormous faith. Abraham was lucky to have her as his wife. And you know that she meant a lot to Abraham, because in verse 2, it says that Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And we see here, this is the first time ever in the Bible that we see someone weeping, someone crying. First book talks about someone who cried over the death of their loved one. So I think for all of us, especially for men, it's okay to weep. It's okay to mourn, to be sad over the loss of a loved one. I grew up, and maybe some of you grew up in a household where the father did not show many emotions. My father was very stoic. He didn't reveal, he had a funny way of showing love. And he definitely didn't cry that often. There were only 2 times that I remember seeing him cry. Men, we don't have to listen to the ways of the world telling us that this is how it should be. I think it's okay, it's fine, it's natural, it's normal for us to weep and to cry. Don't avoid that. According to the Jewish custom, the period of mourning would last 7 days. At least 1 week would be spent mourning, praying, crying out for their loved ones. So it's natural, it's normal. Of course, everyone deals with grief in different ways, and maybe some longer, some shorter. But either way, grieving and mourning is normal and a part of the process. Some people may be conflicted or may have questioned whether or not we should mourn. Should you mourn, or should we celebrate the passing of a believer? I've heard that many times. And some of you may have heard people say, hey, when I die, don't cry for me because I will be in heaven. I'll be in a better place. That's true, yes. But we also have to remember that death is a result of sin. Therefore, death should not be celebrated. Right? When you look at the Bible as an example, we can reference the death of Lazarus in the book of John. Mary and Martha, who were the brothers or sisters of Lazarus, their brother. And when they are found weeping at the loss of their loved one, of their brother. And when Jesus arrives at the scene, at the death of Lazarus, he doesn't say, hey, stop crying. He doesn't say, hey, this is unnatural. What are you doing? Why are you weeping? Why are you crying? He's in a better place. He doesn't say that. He doesn't address that. He doesn't even say, hey, you know what? Just wait a moment because your tears will stop because I'm going to bring him back to life. That would be insensitive. He doesn't do any of that. Instead, what we get is the shortest verse in the Bible saying that Jesus wept. And I think if Jesus showed that kind of emotion as a human, as a man that walked on earth, if he could mourn, if he could grieve and weep and cry, I think the same should be for us. That we should not be afraid to weep and cry over the loss of a loved one. It's natural. And even though we mourn the loss of loved ones, we do not mourn like the world mourns. Because we know that there is a future. We know that there is hope. We know that there's hope in Jesus. The first book of the Bible shows us evidence of someone weeping. But we also see at the last book of the Bible shows us evidence that one day there will be no more tears. Revelation 21:4 says, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things had passed away. And that is the hope that we cling on to. That one day, when we see Jesus face to face, or when he returns to earth, that we will no longer have to experience death, suffering, pain anymore. And that is the hope that we cling on to. The second thing that we see in this passage is we need to learn to honor. Okay, learn to honor. After some time had passed of his mourning, of his loss of his beloved wife, he takes action now to prepare for the funeral and for the burial of his wife. So this leads Abraham to talk to the Hittites. And he requests them, can I purchase a property so that I can put my wife into the tomb? And even though Abraham has no roots in this area, he has an honorable reputation amongst the Hittites. They refer to him as the Prince of God. Isn't that interesting that they would call him that? And they realize that he is a man of honor, a man of integrity. And they offer him, you can have any land, anywhere you want to use as a burial site. Now, there are a couple things that should stand out when you look at Abraham's interaction with Ephron about this burial place. All right? First of all, Abraham was getting a bargain. Right? They were willing to give this land for free. Now, who here would pass up that kind of offer, especially when it comes to property? Especially if you're in California, someone gave you a piece of land, you wouldn't say no if it was for free. But somehow he turned that down. I think that's evidence of Abraham's faith, that he depended on God, that he didn't want to receive handouts from those who did not know God. If you guys remember when Abraham, a few chapters earlier, when he went on that rescue mission to save his nephew Lot, and after he successfully gets them and retrieves the people of Sodom, and he brings them back to their land, the king of Sodom comes out to greet him, and as a thank you, he says, let me give you a reward. Let me give you riches. Let me give you property. Let me give you livestock. But Abraham says, no, I don't want to receive anything from you because I don't want people to think that my riches came from someone else other than God. So he refuses that reward. And so Abraham here, he insists on paying full price for the land to bury his wife. I believe this was Abraham's way of honoring Sarah. He was willing to pay a hefty price because his wife was worth it. It says that Abraham paid 400 shekels of silver. Now, to give you context of just how much that was, later on in 2 Samuel 24:24, King David, he wanted to build an altar to worship God. And he asked the people who owned the property, saying, how much can I purchase this land so that I can worship God? And no, take it for free. And he says, no, I will not offer sacrifice to God that costs me nothing. So they agreed. And do you know how much he paid? 50 shekels for a piece of property that would later become the temple of Israel. Now, that was a big piece of property. And here Abraham purchased his property for 400 shekels, probably 8 times more than what he should have. But he was willing to, he didn't haggle, he didn't negotiate because this was for his wife. And I think there's something to take away for us. Husbands out there, don't be cheap when it comes to your wife. I'm serious. Don't be cheap. If you're not married yet, if you one day become a husband, love your wife in such a way that you lavish her with love. Don't be a Scrooge when it comes to purchasing gifts or showering her with love. Don't be a cheapskate. Learn to honor her. If she's willing to marry you, there's a reason why. She's stuck with you, right? So honor her with the gifts, the affection, all that you can to give to her. Husbands, another thing that we can also take away from. Spend less time looking at the screens on your phone, your tablets, your computers, your monitors, and spend more time looking at your wives. Can I get an amen? Man, after the first service, all the guys, all the married men, their heads were down low. They're like, oh man, Pastor Mike, why'd you have to go down there? I felt like they needed to create a support group after that. All of them were guilty, and the wives were next to them. They were super happy. All their wives like, yes, preach it. Say another sermon next week about that kind of stuff. Because it's true, is it not? Guys, how much time do we spend on our phones watching TV and not enough time looking at our wives? Honor her. Spend time with her. Show her that she's valuable to you. Tell her that you care about her. I say this all the time, but too often the wedding ceremony turns out to be the closing ceremony for men, right? Once they get married, they stop loving their wives. They stop going on dates. They stop treating her like the queen that she needs to be. Where's the saying marriage that we should stop doing that? Love your wives, men, husbands. Guys, if you're single, get it now, all right? Don't wait till later. Don't wait to make that mistake. Look at these husbands who are hanging their heads low, asking for forgiveness. Don't be in that position later on. Husbands, do a better job loving your wives, honoring her that you should be doing. Right? A lot of times when we want to make our wedding day, our marriage, the first day of marriage, we want it to be the best. And women, they start planning, preparing, thinking about their wedding day from when they're 9 years old. Right? They start thinking, I'm going to wear this kind of dress. I even met a girl who was in high school who already thought of what her engagement ring would look like. And she had it as her desktop image. She would look at it every day and just imagining what she wasn't even dating yet, right? And she had a picture of a ring. She was imagining what it would look like to be engaged, to have a wedding. Maybe some of you had thought of a destination wedding. And we think, we want our first day of marriage to be the best. And I always used to think, treat every day of marriage like it's Valentine's Day. But after reading this passage and after being married now for almost 20 years, I realized I think the most important day is the last day of marriage. We don't know when that will be, but do we treat every day like the last day we will be together? I think that's maybe a helpful perspective. I know that some of you who are just married, you're not thinking that far ahead. You're not thinking what the last day of your marriage will look like. But maybe now is the time to have that on your radar, to think about what will that last day look like? Am I treating every day as though it's special? Am I treating her the way she deserves to be treated? Guys, I hope that this is not something that we will regret many years later. But the third thing that I think we see in this passage here is learn to live like a foreigner. Okay? Learn to live like a foreigner. And when I talk to older people, when I talk to parents, some of them, even though they're living in the States, they want to be buried in their home country. Because that's where they grew up. That's where their ancestors are. That's where their parents were buried, their grandparents or great-grandparents. That is considered their home. And it was no different for Abraham. He also probably had that feeling. He was probably wanted to take Sarah and bury her in her home country. But in a sense, Abraham was living like a missionary. He knew that God called him into this foreign land, and this is where he was going to bury his wife, because he believed that this is the place that God had placed him in. And that would be his first land that he would ever own. Because he was a foreigner, he was not able to own his own land. And he needed to purchase it, even though many years later it would be his. Abraham accepted that life, his calling to be a foreigner in this land. And Abraham chose to temporarily. Do you give towards causes that provide for God's kingdom? Today we saw the video about CGN TV. How cool, how great would that be if we just gave just even a little bit, like $10, one-time donation. That's like, a value meal at McDonald's. If you gave up one meal for the cause of God's kingdom. What if you sponsored a child? Compassion. What if you gave to someone who had need? Are we investing in those kinds of things? Are we volunteering at Holy Wind because we want to help the children gain a spiritual experience and redeeming what was Halloween into Holy Wind? Are we in the habit of giving generously to the work of God's kingdom? We need to have the mindset of a foreigner, knowing that one day we will be called home to be with God. So as I invite our praise team to come up, the only way that we can live as foreigners in this world is when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. We were not made to be satisfied with this brief period of life here on earth and then enter into death. Right? Our lives are just a mist. Our lives are brief, but we have all of eternity to look forward to because God has put that in our hearts. But sadly, so many of us have lost that perspective. We've lost that goal that one day we will get to see and meet God. Paul tells us in Colossians 3:2, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. So let's do that today. Can we take some time to pray? And let's make our focus be on eternity. And I'm sure Abraham was not prepared for the death of Sarah, but he knew, he honored her, he prepared for the future. Knowing that he is just a foreigner, he relied on God for every purpose, for every promise that God gave. Let's also rely on that, knowing what our future holds, knowing that one day this life will end, but we have all of eternity to spend with God. How are you spending this short life that you have? Let's pray.